Well, hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to the Scale Your Startup event. Today we're going to be talking about um, scaling product and scaling team. Originally, when we had sort of put this event together, we had thought about actually separating the two events, those two topics as single things. But we decided that let's actually put them together because they actually go in hand really, really well. I'm going to kick off the event just by asking all the speakers to do a quick introduction of themselves. And I'll actually just start by introducing myself. So my name's David Shaw, and I'm a founder of Invisible Building. We run. I'm really involved with design of product and development of products. I'm sort of a bit of a hybrid when it comes to design and development, but I don't have a lot of the experience that sort of a proper like product owner would have, or a proper product designer or a proper CTO would have. So that's why it's going to be really valuable to hear experience from the panelists today. So if you could kick it off, could JP, could you start first just by introducing yourself? Tell us about your experience with either building a product or scaling a team.
Yeah, David, sure, of course. So my name is JP Taggart. The business is Core Impact. We are basically a consultancy that helps organizations to develop their people. And we do it through a focus around building organizational culture. So creating that employee buy-in, but scaling the business as well as the team as well, based around that. My experience, I come from a management background initially. I have a lot of experience in managing people. Scaled a team from sort of like 10 people up to about 40 in that over a 10-year period of growing the business, along with actually Sean, who darted away there for everyone. And now we actually help organizations, actually a lot of startups, to scale their teams and scale the business, and just understanding, what needs to be done, the roles and responsibilities, what type of culture do you create in order to grow that business, and when is it the right time to bring more people in, when is the wrong time, what sort of mindsets do you need to have, because what we find is in the startup phase, I'll probably go off a tangent, I'll stop, but sometimes it's about getting out of the way of your team, as a director, because you're so used to working on the business that you find it's actually really hard to take a step back and relinquish some of that responsibility. And we can help them with that as well. And we'll do it through a medley of different things. We do training workshops, and we do one-to-one coaching and mentoring with business owners and their teams, and all sorts of different projects around building the culture and building the team as a result of that. So we do really exciting work. So when I was asked by Jenny to come in and chat about that, I was really excited to learn about everybody else and the journeys that they're on.
Cheers, dude. I actually remember a podcast that Jenny came on over at your side of things when you were doing marketing with her. So I got a bit of insight into what you do then, but it's really interesting to hear what you're doing. I'm glad to see Sean's in the room as well, because one of the questions later on might actually be involved in how you see that or whatever. But what about Scarlett? Can you give us a quick introduction on yourself and how you're involved with product or scaling team?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to be honest, guys, my whole life has been product. So you can feel free to ask me anything during, I think, this sort of the breakout room. So my background, it's probably a little bit atypical in terms of product management. I'm actually a massive geek. I was a nuclear physicist, got a bit sort of fed up. I worked in the commercial element of nuclear fusion power and sort of trying to solve the global energy crisis. Really enjoyed the sort of commercial application of technology, and that brought me out from fusion power into software. Trained up, started my career in software in Apple, went out after a few years into consultancy, honestly did the rounds on about every kind of product you could dream of. I've probably touched one at least somewhere throughout my years in consultancy. And then I got the bug, the entrepreneurial bug that I think we all end up with if we're all here today. Ended up doing a couple of startups. My most recent one I co-founded 3 years ago. It's a company called Clario. We were a big kind of very disruptive consumer cybersecurity product, and we did a big global scale, big launch. I've just exited there. I'm on gardening leave now for a couple of months, doing some consultancy, chilling out, sleeping for probably the first time in 3 years. And then I'm going back in the autumn to a new CPO position. So you can honestly ask me anything about the product side, also the scaling side, and building healthy product cultures, building healthy teams around product. What's the alchemy or the dark magic involved there? I've probably seen it, heard it, or done it at least once before. So that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome, Scarlett. Thanks so much for the introduction, and congrats on the future move on that.
Thanks.
What about you, Richard? So I believe you're more of a technical founder, possibly. Could you give us a quick introduction on sort of your experience with product and team?
Yep, no problem. So my name is Richard Davidson. So I'm currently CTO at Orson. So Orson, I'm not sure if anybody really heard of it, but so Orson's a product to allow people to share content, basically content and files and videos, many types of content. It allows people then to collaborate and provide feedback on that content. So the majority of our customers right now are agencies that are sharing content with their customers. So that's sort of our sweet spot, that kind of vendor client relationship, and sharing content that way, and being able to kind of feedback on it. Traditionally, that we find, it's actually still, a lot of people are still doing that via email. Some people are using tools like WeTransfer, etc., but they're not. But most of the collaboration features are very difficult and very separated from the content. So that's the problem we're kind of really trying to solve at the moment. As you said, I come from a very technical background. So I was before I was in a company called Epona in Belfast, which eventually got acquired by Intel. So it was kind of originally a telecoms company, but moved more into kind of API management and all that kind of stuff. So that's where I kind of spent a good bit of time, moved up through whole lot of different positions, from kind of on-site work to, like a senior principal architect and stuff. And then I spent some time after acquisition in Intel, and then I come out, done some consultancy myself after a few years in Intel, and then I kind of drifted into the Orson as a co-founder with the original company. Was started with Daniel Midlade, which is our CEO still. And then I came on with Daniel. He's come a completely non-technical background. And then I came on as a kind of co-founder and technical kind of side of the business. So in terms of Orson, I do, I'm in charge of the dev team, building the product, deploying the product infrastructure, all that kind of stuff from a kind of CTO perspective. I also do a lot of product discovery stuff, working with the designers and stakeholders and stuff to build, sort of discovery around new product features, MVPs, and just scoping out features based on feedback. We don't really, that sort of, a lot of the kind of product management stuff would fall on to me too. And it's sort of a split kind of role at the minute between myself and Daniel, but a lot of the internal and kind of working out based on all the kind of stakeholder feedbacks will still fall in my background. I'm definitely more technical, but definitely drifting a lot more lately into the kind of product management side.
Awesome, Richard. Thanks so much for that overview. I want to actually start off by asking you the next question as well, if you don't mind. Yep. So you talked about sort of your background and experience and how you sort of work for these massive, large companies. Mm-hmm. What sort of attracted you to getting back into like the startup world and becoming a co-founder? Is there anything that you would recommend people do, or is there anything that sort of made you really jump back into founding your own startup?
Yeah, so I really enjoyed when, the earlier days when I worked for Epona. It's kind of, fast moving, we were building stuff quickly. I had a lot of autonomy. We came up, new features. I always had kind of this aspiration to do something myself, like a, entrepreneurial kind of thing. From university, we did a kind of a single module, and where we had to come up with like a mock business plan and do all that and build, almost release a product. And I really, really enjoyed it, and always was kind of sort of seed in me that knew I wanted to do that at some point. But I'm glad I went into Epona and kind of learned all the technical skills before I decided to do something myself. When I went into Intel and we kind of became a bigger company, I kind of realized it was a bit more soul destroying. I didn't. Things were very slow moving. It was just very a lot of teams competing internally with each other, rather than actually releasing that to customers. It just wasn't an environment I particularly enjoyed. So when I came out, then I knew I wanted to do something, myself or something I had a great deal of ownership of, and that's how I can really. And I came out and I was doing consultancy, kind of looking around for different things to do, and then I sort of got in contact with Daniel through a previous person that was CEO of Epona. Actually, he put me in contact with Daniel because he knew Daniel was looking at co-founder, and then we kind of, over time, I started part-time, and then I just sort of drifted into being involved, full-time then.
Awesome, Richard. I think that sort of mentions what started about just having that sort of entrepreneurial energy inside of you and sort of wanting to make impact. So Scarlett, sort of coming off the back of that, what do you think of founders? So a founder has like a really cool idea and they want to build an MVP. Like, how do they actually go about so say they have like they think they know there's a problem. How do they actually get market research to work out that there is a problem?
Oh, this is one of my favorite questions. So I might ramble on a bit, guys, so just feel free to jump in and, direct it as whatever seems most useful. So I guess I'll use Clario as the most recent example, because actually it was the one which was probably the most market research I think I've ever done in my career. So the idea for Clario actually came from, I was on another project working on a kind of more traditional, one of those very big famous cybersecurity products that you would know. And they had brought me in to do a piece of work around what wasn't working, within the industry. They all have a pretty bad reputation. And to be honest, when they invited me in, I would tend to be known as a kind of, really good sticky products, very consumer engaging, really nice kind of front ends as well. I was quite shocked when they asked me to work with them. But what became really apparent during all of that research, I sort of got into their user base, started doing things like churn surveys, win back surveys, doing little user groups, focus groups, and also a bit of market research as well. And it was just, it's not even that I came up with the concept for Clario, it's almost the market just sort of said to me, please build something nicer for us. And that was the beginning. So really the whole Clario product was underpinned by the market research, just telling, us what we needed. So that was the birth of it. I was the sort of the product person the whole way through, built the whole thing, the MVP part. So really, once the decision was made to go for it and to, start a founding team and build the new product and the company and the brand, I think we could already see that most people had the answers for us on not only that they needed something, that was more friendly, but also what that actually meant for them and what to avoid, in the first MVP. So we sort of made the strategic decision actually to begin the prototyping phase actually directly and co-create it with a little cohort of what we call alpha users. So, we were using our black books, we were getting all of our connections, asking people to come in and sort of blind test various prototypes for us. And then at the same time, we ran a pretty formal market research program where we used a little bit of our seed money and we did a market research piece with about 3,000 participants across all of our target markets. And same idea, we would ask those guys very, very specific questions around, you've used product A before, what was the thing you found most useful? What was the thing you found most frustrating? And we actually did, as I said, I'm a massive geek and a scientist by nature. So I just did this very hefty data program and sort of mined out all the insights and then started to group those up into the MVP. And then we used our alpha testers to sort of decide that, yes, the MVP prototype is good. Let's invest and build it into a beta. And then again, we did the beta launch as well and did a lot of sort of market testing at the same time as doing the actual product, which to be honest was a very complicated build. It had 7 different kind of core cyber technologies built in underneath one very sort of AI responsive front end as well. So that was quite an intense time. We also ran in parallel a branding piece because we knew that getting the branding was the thing that was going to set us apart from the likes of Norton and McAfee and really cut that space. So, yeah, that would be my sort of take on it. If and when you can, if you know that there's a need out there, co-create when possible instead of you guys taking a guess at what's the right thing, because chances are you'll be pretty close, but you'll test it with your real users and you'll be really disappointed the first time. But if you have a trusted group of people in from the beginning, they tend to guide you the right way through the process and it minimizes that whole friction on the show and tell moment.
Awesome. Oh, great answer, Scarlett. Hey, Pete, can I bring you in for the next one? So just as Scarlett was talking about, and they're talking about having all the people within a team. A lot of people apply to the Raise Accelerator program who are solo founders, and that's great and something we want to encourage. But would you have any sort of advice in sort of like looking for team members or possibly a co-founder, or what sort of things do people look for in a team?
So do you mean when you're starting to scale it?
Well, just from the get-go even, or is it possible, do you think, for a founder to come in and just be a solo founder, or should they be looking to form a team and then build the product?
From my perspective, I think it would be important to have a product behind you. If you're starting with it, unless you specifically hand pick people who are going to be part of that stage, because obviously I don't have a background in product at all. I'm all about the team. So usually what we're trying to do is work with organizations and the startups in this case to create a clear vision of where you want to go. So similarly, I would imagine with products, with the product design, you've got an end product that you're working towards, and it's just basically working backwards. How do we get there? It's the same when it comes to building your team, because the requirements for what that product's going to be, you're going to have to match that up with responsibilities and roles within the organization. So I think it would be fair to say you would probably have to have a clear idea of what you're trying to achieve, and then based on that, find out how many team members you would actually need and what roles need to be filled in order to do that. One of the very first things we'll do is we'll ask startups to figure out exactly what vision they have for the business. What way is the business going to go? And one of the ways we describe that is through, if you imagine your vision's like your destination. So where are you trying to travel to? And then very quickly followed by, what are your core principles or core values, which most people will know. And essentially they're the behaviors. So when you're building a team, you're trying to get everyone to buy in. The big problem in most organizations is engagement and motivation. How do you get people to sing to the same hymn sheet as the startup director or owner or shareholders in any case, right? So it's how do you get them to buy into that? And one of the best ways is by having a clear vision of where you want to go, making sure that they understand what their role is in that. So, very clearly, if you're building a product, because sometimes it can be services and consultancy services we're working with as well, and they're building a team around that. So you're specifically getting people with skills. So if I use that model with similar model of building a product, you're going to have to get people with the right skills. So therefore say the idea as an entrepreneur, we've mentioned entrepreneurial kind of mindsets, and how I find with entrepreneurship, you usually find that you squiggle the lines out, you're coloring in outside the lines, and usually that means you need to figure out how you can add value to the market that you want to work within. So you need to have that idea first, and then you can bring the team on board. And it just grows from there. And usually what you find is, as I mentioned earlier, everyone is in each other's pockets, and it's easy from the beginning to get that buy-in because you have a small enough team, and usually everybody understands very clearly what their role is. So if you imagine the business as like many, many different cogs, and everybody needs to understand what cog they are, it's when it starts to grow, everybody starts thinking, well, I can just half-ass it Monday to Wednesday and just pick it up Thursday and Friday because I don't see where the accountability is for me. Whereas when you have the first sort of 5, 10, maybe even up to 15 people, everyone understands where they're at. You're working together very closely, and it's about identifying where we're going and whose roles are in there. Don't know if that answers the question very well.
Oh, it's good. It was good, Mom. So one of the main reasons why I asked is because I'm a solo founder myself, but just from being or watching the startups come on the Raise program and seeing the investors talk to the people, and the main thing they're always looking for is team. It's one of the things that VCs want to see is just who your team is and how that evolves around your product. But Richard, I could bring you into the next one. So talking about how things evolve around the product. I noticed in your LinkedIn profile, you actually mentioned how you're an advocate of iterative development or prototyping. Can you talk a bit about iterative development, prototyping, and sort of how you do that at Origin?
Yeah, so I can talk a wee bit about kind of where the iterations we've been through, the major iterations from a product perspective and the pivots, and then I can talk about how we do it kind of day to day. Does that work?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, hopefully, brilliant.
Yeah, so originally Orson started out with Daniel before I was involved. It started, he was at university. It started out as a way just for people to share reading lists within universities. So basically share their content. He was a law student, so he seen this as a problem. It was kind of like there's a lot more reading probably than a software degree, but basically there's no central place to share reading lists and share content. So he basically engaged with a few universities. We got a bit of traction, got a basic product, really basic product built, and then we started basically trying to get users using it within the university. So we engaged with libraries and sort of course directors and stuff. We got good traction, got really positive feedback. We started allowing people to kind of collaborate around that feedback as well, like collaborating lists, all good. Everybody has seen it, really liked it. It was kind of a lot better than the software that they were kind of using in the universities. But then we kind of had a dead end because just from a business perspective, they weren't prepared to kind of commit to it. They weren't prepared to roll it out across the organization. They weren't prepared to pay. But even if they did, even the rollout was a big problem. Nobody really wanted to take major ownership and put their it wasn't their job to kind of go, we're going to roll this out across, 10,000 students. And even though it was really positive feedback, we just couldn't cross that threshold in that organization. So we started then we pivoted into kind of more like the same sort of features, but slightly changed on small businesses. We've done a bit of kind of product discovery around it, seen the problem kind of existed there. This was kind of early days of Microsoft Teams and stuff were sort of up and coming. They were kind of like, they weren't established like they were today. Teams was really rough around the edges at that point in time, and not very few people were using it. So got okay traction again with businesses, but never, we were very, very general. We were kind of, we didn't really focus on our niche, and that was our kind of a problem. Over time then, we could see that people were our best users that are getting the most value were this kind of agency serving clients. So we kind of then really focused on that, started focusing on that niche. We've done a lot of, like, over the space of like a month, we did like 100 customer interviews, reached out to 100 people that were kind of in that ICP and customer profile, done like a half-hour interview with them, give them an Amazon voucher for their time, and then but also sort of really grilled them on what way their processes work today, what they do, what they like, what they don't like. And that was kind of really enlightening for us. Like, the next version of the product kind of came out of that, and it was more and more, like, more interviews we do, we were getting more and more confident. It also built us up a pipeline of initial users as well to use whenever we had the kind of product there. And a lot of users kind of came along with us, after that. That was the biggest learning for us, I would think, as we went along, is talk to customers early. Like before, talk to as many people as you can and talk to them early before you start building, because I think your gut is right in terms of what you need to do usually, but the finer details are completely probably the opposite of what you think. And I think that really comes out in conversations. Like, in terms of day to day, it's pretty much the same process, but just quicker cycles. We all our feedback, like, so we're continuously talking to customers. We're still doing a lot of interviews and stuff. We're actually still reaching out to people, interviews, and all the sales. Everything gets recorded. We use Product Board as kind of a central place for feedback, from feature requests, from customer success, talking to customers. Everything goes into Product Board. It's just like Chrome plugin if you're not used it, and it'll just push everything into one place. I will then tag that with a feature. So it might be, a new file type support for, I don't know, Adobe XD files. And then, and I'll tag that. That's all I really do. And when the feature comes in, I don't really get into much detail. I might ask some questions for more clarification, but it's kind of light touch. And then over time, you'll see things starting to bubble to the top in Product Board a bit. Maybe it's, things like some of our pipeline is like approval around being able to approve files and stuff. Like, all our customers are kind of talking about this, mention it. It's just bubbling its way up before, like naturally organically through the thing. And then over time, then that becomes our roadmap. That, from a feature perspective, that's how we kind of, like, a lot now, the more customers you get, it's easier to kind of define your next features. Also, sales will feed into that a lot, because they'll be talking to people and they'll be like saying, we can't adopt this until we have this feature, basically. And we will go, well, we'll put it in a pipeline. We'll think, and then we won't build it from that point in time unless there's a few people asking for it. But then, over time, we'll go back to them and go, well, actually, we have this now. Are you interested? And, we're 2 months later, we might have something for them. Yeah, so it's basically just iterative cycles, quickly, and trying to always take as much information from the customer and from people and stakeholders as you can. Sorry, that was a bit of a ramble. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. It's I was my trade is a web design, like, so I've always, anytime I was doing websites for people, I would always be talking about how it's a living thing, and product startups is just the same thing. So, like, you're constantly iterative and making it better. Previous joined us here. He's one of the speakers, and so I'll do a quick introduction to Griffin. If you want to, we can circle back to the question that I actually asked JP. Griffin, could you quickly introduce yourself, and also just the question is about how do startups find and scale a team?
Okay. Hi, everybody. Apologies, I'm running a bit late. I went to get my second dose of vaccination, so I thought, got to get that done, otherwise I can't go anywhere. Yeah, so a bit of background. my organization is MyPAM, and basically we are a talent acquisition platform specializing in early careers, 18 to 25. So we work with organizations to help them kind of solve what is one of the biggest problems coming up in place. How do you bring new talent into your organization? And we use that through helping them analyze their data, and then through different various machine learning algorithms, help them kind of match the right talent to their particular roles they have in their organization, and then we work with them through that kind of process of bringing those individuals on board. So that's a little bit about us. And then you told, it's around the question around building your team and scaling. Is that right, David?
Yeah, so what the question was about, like, we get a lot of solo founders coming into the Race Accelerator program. Whenever we're talking to investors, they're all focused on team. So how do solo founders find the right team, or how do they find a co-founder and then scale it up?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've had the benefit of doing both, of the first startup having a co-founder with me, and then this time having to sort of bring a team around to help me kind of build the product, because I'm not coming from a kind of software development background, so I need people that an expertise. I may be a bit biased, but what I tend to do is to me, it's all about using your contact book, leveraging what you want to do. So for us, our first priority was we need to build a platform. And we need to have, that's going to be the biggest challenge for me, because obviously when the development team start to talk in development speak, I'm not going to understand anything they're saying. So I might have this vision of what we need to build. However, I need to have expertise in place to do that. My first recruit was to bring in a chief product officer. So I was lucky enough to kind of look into my black book, network a lot with people that I know to kind of say, look, this is what I'm looking to build. Who do you recommend? And I think that's the core thing. When you're starting up as a startup, if you're a single founder or you've got a co-founder, you kind of got to go out there and leverage your network, talk to as many people as possible, and try and get someone who get recommendations. Because I was like, as I said, Nelly came on board. I had the benefit of working with Nelly for 18 months, so I knew what she was all about. I knew how she worked. But at the same time, I also knew that she had other things going along. So it was that kind of conversation to say, look, would you be interested in doing this product? This is what I'm looking to do. Would you love to come on board? And then we quickly recognized that actually what we needed to do is bring a bit more expertise. So we tapped into my network again to find Dion, who's our technical advisor. So I think that's the core part of it. And that network he then introduced us to the guy who's our chief data scientist. So all of a sudden, you've kind of got a foundation team just by networking. And don't go, another thing as well, depending on where you are, you don't always have big pockets and deep pockets. So, don't be afraid to share some of your equity if you have to. And, people go share options. We went into equity straight away because we felt that had more kind of value and buy-in. So yeah, that's how we kind of got. So we've got now team of 5 in place on the back of that. So that's one of the things to do. And you're scaling up a startup. It's going to go up in stages. So find what you need, most importantly, and then kind of your network is so important. And I'm a recruiter talking like that as well. You'd never be afraid to ask everybody. There's anybody who else do you think can do this? This is what we're looking to do, and have a vision in your mind of what you want to build as well, or where you want to take the business.
Awesome, good. The question then to Scarlett, we're talking a bit about the product, and we're talking about having your team sort of buy into the product, but then looking at the customers and sort of looking at the user experience side of things. Like, what are your thoughts around user experience and customer experience? Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I think, to be honest, guys, it very much depends on who you're probably targeting. If you're in SaaS, and certainly in D2C SaaS or direct to consumer, your experience, not just within the product itself, I think as you get more experienced at churning out different products and rolling out different launches and stuff, you start to stop seeing it as just your core product UX, and you start to see things like what's happening, when they see an ad. I used to know nothing about advertising. I'm like a core techie, massive geek, no understanding of digital marketing funnels. And when I was doing my scale up, with my co-founders on Clario, I had to learn all that stuff, and you start to very quickly be able to connect. And a lot of you guys, as Raise cohort members and things, you'll be doing a bit of everything as an entrepreneur, and you have to. So try to see the UX as an entire experience, every single touch point that your user or potential user is going to have, right from the first ad to your landing pages, your sales funnel, your product, the usage of the product, that retention moment that's really important, to minimize your churn, all the way through to advocacy and actually mobilizing your core base, to grow, is absolutely critical. I guess I'm biased because we built Clario, my original concept for the product was to take a very, you know, dare I say it, slightly prehistoric industry of consumer cybersecurity and turn it into something very, very accessible. And actually, I mean, if there's any question around, does it work? Does the whole focus on customer experience work from both B2B and D2C? Because we had a split in terms of channel mix. You know, we launched actually globally just last year in January. I was out in Vegas, actually got COVID before the whole pandemic started properly. You know, our booth was built unfortunately in Wuhan, so that was a bit of a situation. But we launched out there globally. And as I said, I've just done an exit on the company. And within about 3 months of us launching, even just the sort of the early MVP, we just did a very brave thing and did a commercial launch on the MVP to see how it went. We were sort of featured right up there. You know, Tech Radar just named us, I think, one of the top 10 antiviruses for 2020, right up with the Nortons and the McAfees and Bitdefenders and all the big players. And the thing that actually cut us the space in the market was actually just that our user was so sort of brought into the process. You know, when we begin the whole journey, we onboard them not by telling them what we can do for them, but by asking them what they're worried about. And it's quite a clever little technique that we use in the personalization journey, where instead of setting up and ticking all the boxes, they're actually saying, you know, it'll say something like, JP, I'm going to pick on you. Hey, JP, you know, we can cover you around your home network. What are you most concerned about? You know, somebody like Chris might say, oh, you know, my kids love Peppa Pig, and is my Alexa listening whenever we talk about Peppa Pig, and it's going to target ads at us? Or, you know, somebody who has a home office, you know, maybe like Richard or someone, you might be quite concerned about people hacking if you store any code base or you have any access paths to your, you know, your centralized bases at home that you're working from home. And what we did was, by getting people to tell us what they were concerned about, we were actually also teaching them all the things we can save them from and getting lots of value buy-in. So by the time they'd finished it, they were like, I love you. Thank you for making me safe. This is amazing. I'll never leave this product. And you're like 5 minutes into the user experience. So I think there's a huge amount of power there in getting them in. And, you know, as Richard said, and as I said at the start, that co-creation piece with your users at an early stage, it's absolutely critical to getting that very motivating, compelling product. And, you know, honestly, my initial strategy for Clario was focus on direct to consumer. And the funny thing was, because we set apart so much in the experience and it was such a sort of cut above, we ended up bringing it, you know, massive amount of B2B revenue and deals, and we had a lot of visibility. You know, we were like a scale up and we're getting, you know, like massive companies, huge big ISPs that lead in the market approaching us because they wanted to supply us to their customer bases. So I couldn't stress enough how important it is to focus on it in the beginning.
Awesome, Scarlett. And just follow up on that, can I ask you about how important is to find balance in this sort of move fast and break things world? Like, so how much of it can you just, like, I'm a big fan of no code, I'm a big fan of getting products just out there and testing them, but how much of it should there be a balance between, oh, the user experience needs to come first, or it should be, you know, let's test it and then find out?
Do you know what, to be very honest, guys, and it was actually, it sort of touches a wee bit on Richard's question as well around that iterative build piece. The most honest advice that I can give you is, you know, and I've sat in the seat where I've been the person pushing deploy on something that's going to, you know, tens of millions of people. And I've sat in the seat where I've been pushing go live on the first day of a very small build for maybe 10 beta users. The fear of releasing never goes away. You're never going to feel ready. You're never going to feel as if you're completely comfortable with what you've built. Because the truth is, you know, with modern product, either on the B2B side for your clients directly in your integrations or on the consumer side, you're honestly never going to know until it's out there in the wild. User testing, market research will tell you one thing. You'll get that button in front of them and they'll not be converting on your CTA. They'll be churning out of the process for no reason that you can't see. And you'll, to be very honest, you'll agonize over hitting the release button, trying to seek that balance that you asked me about around, you know, the beautiful experience and the functionality and the testing. The honest truth is, no matter how long you take on that process, and I've made that mistake where I've spent months delaying, a push because I've been really hung up on, let's smoke test it completely to an inch of its life. Let's robustly make sure nothing's breaking. There's no bugs. It can scale. The servers aren't going to crash. Every pixel perfect design is padded correctly. The fonts are perfect. It's been triple proofread in every language we push in. And I've done the other side where I've just kind of lost my patience and been like, turn it out. I don't care if it's not right, we'll fix it. And I think the honest truth and the balance is get it to a point where you're not going to be ashamed of it, but just push it, and you're never going to feel like it's done, but just get it out there. And as long as you have been careful in building a very honest relationship with either your client or your sort of market brand piece, as long as you're sort of respected as a supplier, as a brand, as a company, people will forgive you the silly mistakes. People do it. ASOS, I remember a few years ago, did this massive screw up where they misprinted their website or something on all of their delivery bags. And instead of putting it to waste, they were like, you know what? We're trying to become more green friendly. This is a huge issue. We've actually got our own website wrong on our packaging. There's millions of you out there. We're going to go ahead and send you the mistake. I hope it's fine. Here's 5% off your next order. And I think if you have the bravery to have that relationship and connection to your market as well, people really don't mind if you have the odd screw up. We've all been there. And actually it's quite fun when you get the call at 4 a.m. Did you know that this is wrong? You're like, coffee, 5 minutes, war room time. And I think that's where a lot of the joy actually as an entrepreneur comes from. It's actually not having the balance quite perfect, getting it out there, and actually the joy of everyone piling into a war room at 6 a.m. in the morning or 7 a.m. and being like, why do we fix it, guys? That builds real trust in your team as well, and if people aren't afraid to say that there hasn't been the right balance or there's been a problem, and you have that very healthy culture. We used to do F-up parties once a month where we'd get people to stand up and say what they screwed up, and we'd either celebrate them or people would pile in for advice. So I think that's a really, really healthy thing around the balance.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Scarlett. And whenever we were chatting to Al before the event kicked off, he said one of the cool things about these events is just people learn from their mistakes. So like a really good point to end on. And JP, a follow up. I've got a question actually about your website address. So your website address is developingyourpeople.com. I think it's a really cool thing. And is that sort of like a thing that's been thought out through customer experience or user experience, or just any ideas on that?
Yeah, so when we were putting the website together, we of course were thinking, right, coreimpact.com. And it was actually when we used to work as part of Movie House Cinemas, we were in the management team there. And the IT manager had said to us, even with your email, like our email is engage@developingyourpeople. So you'll see behind me, engage, enable, empower. And basically we said, we want to stand out. We want to make sure we're basically saying what we do on the tin, for lack of a better way of describing it. And for developing your people, whenever people ask us, like, what is it what you do? And I think when you mentioned it so well there, Scarlett, around, I love that idea about the FU sort of F up sort of stand-ups, for lack of a better way of describing it, once a month, because that's excellent. It's, to me, that paints the picture of psychological safety in the workplace, and a lot of the cultural work we'll do will be about, it's safe to fail. And you learn from them lessons, and that's actually the best part of it, actually. But getting back to it, yeah, we wanted to make sure that people understood what we do, and I think that it's really important. You mentioned user experience there, Scarlett, and one area that we're helping organizations very much so recently is just around your employee experience, your employee journey, and the importance of like the touch points. So just like you would with a product, and you're getting that constant feedback and wanting to refine and get it better. It's the same with your team when you're building them. I think that when you're trying to create that culture, it's about taking every little touch point, right down from an email, a text, whether you have an intranet system, whatever you're using, right through the first point of contact, which is your job advert. We're saying the organizations, especially startups, this is an opportunity. It's a gateway into the journey that these people are going to go in with you. And Kofi, you mentioned giving a bit of equity away, making sure that you get that buy-in. It's whenever you get past that sort of initial stage where you get true buy-in, and the people get to feel that entrepreneurial journey of the days where you're like, oh my God, we're going to take over Google. It's going to be amazing. Let's keep this going. And then days where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe we rolled that out, like Scarlett mentioned, and the taxi tightness in the ass. And that's all part of the journey. And you can create that very well at the start. and it's all very exciting. And as I said, finger on the pulse, you can feel the impact that you have in the organization, and that really taps into the developing your people part. It really develops your people individually, and it gives that real intrinsic motivation. That internal system of, I love what I do. I'm jumping out of bed. I'm really enjoying the work we're doing. And yeah, so I went off a tangent there, but I just wanted to add a tiny point to what Scarlett had said about just the user experience and how that translates to building the team up a bit.
That's cool. That's awesome, man. So it's more of like an open question to anyone, and JP, you can follow on from it if you want. It's about data tracking. So a lot of people would use data tracking to like test building products, maybe even test your team and track your employees, how they're going. Any thoughts around data tracking, how anyone uses it?
Yeah, I could just add a little bit in terms of, me and Sean won't be behind the door and saying that we don't know a whole lot about technology. We've learned a lot, and I think that when you've got your own entrepreneurial journey, you learn, as I think Scarlett, I keep picking on you again, but you mentioned earlier there that you get to know a lot of different things. You're doing a lot of different things as the director and as the founders, and I've found that just whenever you're trying to track KPIs, for instance, key performance indicators for your team, it's easy at the start. It's easy because you're, as I said, finger on the pulse. There's a small team. What we're saying is, when you get up to 12 or 15 people, that's when the tracking becomes really relevant, because the lines of communication, there's quite a lot of studies that back up, within an internal team, after sort of 12 to 15 people, that's when these whispers starts coming into play, and the vision and the communication within the organization starts really challenging, and that's where we come in. Where we're helping organizations to try and mimic what you have at the start, where you can track how individually everyone's doing. It's just interesting to me how people lose sight of that. I think it's because when you start adding structure, when you start adding the levels of responsibility, you've got a supervisor or a manager, or at the start you start off with your CTOs and your CFOs, and everyone has a really interesting title, but when it gets to the administrators at the bottom of the structure, for lack of a better way of describing it, sometimes they can lose where they fit. I keep coming back to that. And when you're tracking their performance, there's some really great tools. Like we're partnering up with some fantastic organizations for employee engagement tools. And that's one of the things that I would mention around just tracking their performance, whether it be through personal development chats or one-to-ones, for lack of a better way of describing that. We try to stay away from appraisals because that becomes very rigid and formal, which is okay if you're talking about improving their rate of pay or their salaries. But from the intrinsic perspective, engagement wise, you want to make sure that you keep a line of communication that's relevant to the size of team that you have at that time. So you don't need them if there's only a few of you. When you start getting up to 15 plus, that's when you're going to start thinking, right, are they especially now the hybrid model of remote working and working in the office, some are home, some are in the office. Sometimes you need these tools, and there's some really cost-effective tools that you can use in order to track them. Of course, then, as Sean loves, your good old, and there's a million things you can use, but Sean would love his Excel sheets, where you can sort of, I remember we had this, it's probably like 10 pages long, 10 sheets long in one Excel sheet of an incentive program that we created. It was all very much tied into performance, obviously, but linked to the culture, like the core values and how do you display them, and what does that link up to? It all becomes very psychological. But there is no one size fits all, is what I'm saying. It depends on your organization, what type of work you're doing, what type of team you have. And out there's a million tools. I'm sure guys have a lot more knowledge in terms of technology and tracking. And I would imagine it probably translates very well in terms of the surveys you can use online for marketing and stuff with your teams, which we do as well, which is always quite good.
Yep, so Scarlett, Kufa, or Richard, did you have any examples of using data tracking?
So we use a lot of, like, it's absolutely critical for us, like in terms of the product. We'll record kind of user actions in the product. You have to always kind of respect people's privacy. So for example, in our product, you can record, you add comments in chat. We don't really care about what the content of that chat message is, like from a tracking perspective, so it's masked out. But the fact that somebody has sent 5 chat messages after an item and how long that took for, to somebody come in and comment back on that, like that kind of stuff is kind of like so much of our kind of product decisions are based around that. And like, even when we're thinking about things, solving problems or debugging issues as well, if somebody's claiming something didn't work the way they want, sometimes we'll just have to look at our logs and actually find that, some other user did delete their file or something, and they, they're, even though they're kind of adamant they didn't do it, we have, a record of them doing it. And like with, conversations like that happen. But like the thing about the data for us is you don't really know what data you need. So we record a lot of stuff, and we kind of, all the events goes in to kind of a data warehouse, and then we kind of over time, query that data, sort of slice and dice it differently based on what we need. But we've found like it's better to have it than not have it, because you can't never go back and get it back. If you have the raw data, you can kind of write any reports you want on it in the future. So record a lot if you can't. Like there's loads of tools out there to do this. Like our major one we use is, like we put a lot of data into Google BigQuery, which is kind of part of Google Cloud. It's almost free for us. You get massive free usage. You get like 50 terabytes a month or something of queries, which is a huge amount. So we kind of flood that with data, and then we'll write queries, and then we'll use Google Data Studio to kind of write. You have to be able to write SQL queries off it, and then you'll kind of, we can select, sessions, who's the most active users, what they've done, data funnels, all that kind of stuff, and you base so much product decisions off that. More and more as your business goes on, you have to base stuff in data, just, and not on assumptions.
Dave, I know we're quite short on time, but just one really thing that I would want to add into that. Again, on Richard and JP's point, everyone, data is basically the foundation of almost everything you'll ever do. And I think as long as you're combining a very healthy data strategy with the insights from speaking, the quantitative, knowing what's actually going on, and using sort of the human insight version to connect the dots in your data, a very powerful strategy. But the one thing that I just want to mention is, if you've ever built a privacy company like I just did with Clario, you'll be sort of, you're pitching a concept of a product that is both highly personally curated. We collect so much data on you, and we do so much mining with it. You wouldn't even believe the stuff we know. But also at the same time, you're advocating in a very genuine way for data privacy and policy. And one thing I would say, if any of you guys as founders are following what's been happening, tech trends recently, 2021, 2022, especially post-COVID, one of the biggest trends that's out there right after home hybrid model working is actually people being concerned about data privacy, because people are starting to feel digital technology is very much encroaching on the home space, because we've all been stuck at home with nothing but our devices for months on end. Apple have done a very brave privacy policy recently, lost a lot of business in various ways because of it, and they've done it anyway. A lot of people in the market have responded really positively to that. So one thing I would say is always make sure that you're being respectful of your customers' data as much as possible. As a quick example, we were building a very unique, very challenging technically. It was like my baby project and I loved it. It's one of the best days of my career when we went live with it. It was actually an AI browsing extension, which would sort of analyze users' behavior and start to sort of amp up their protection level the more dodgy sites they visited. And we had to find a way to very respectfully do that without actually tracking, you've been to xyz.com that you wouldn't want certain people to see, in the workplace or the home or whatever it is. And we actually came up with, I had this random idea. I think I dreamt it one night actually and scrawled it on a post-it. But one thing, it's about anonymizing your data, being able to get the insight without you breaching the privacy. And it's a very real example of that. Instead of us, what we used to do, in previous companies, just log all of the websites. We actually sort of developed this mechanism that when somebody goes to the website, we assign the actual domain a score of safety, like a rating on privacy and safety issues, and we just log the score instead of the website itself. So we're sort of minimizing out what we store on our users, but still getting what we need from it. So my one sort of golden rule on data is use it as much as possible. It's the best source of anything you can find. But do make sure, especially as a startup, when you're a little bit more open on legalities, you're starting to build clients, your reputation is very, very important. Your integrity is very important. Have a very robust data policy. Do not be afraid to seek out data consultants and legal consultants and just ask them for that little bit of advice, or people, like us, the speakers in the room who've been through it and would be more than happy to point you in the right direction. But a good policy is very important on data when you're scaling.
Definitely. No, I'm a huge fan of encouraging people to take control of their data and have an understanding of their data. And it's something that a lot of people don't really know. They use these social media apps, they use a lot of stuff, but they may know, oh, Google's listening to me or Alexa listening to me, but they don't actually really know what's going on. So it's an interesting topic, and we've had a couple of different conversations at Raise actually at events where we had Jason Bell coming in talking about data, and it was really well received. But Richard, following on from that sort of thing, to ask you a question sort of about open source. Another thing that I would love to encourage anyone to get involved with is open source, and I'm big fan of just reuse in general. What's sort of your thoughts on open source as a startup, and anything like that?
Yeah, so like we use a lot of our software is based on open source software. So the kind of server stack is based on Java and Spring Boot, so it's kind of really established, kind of well respected kind of community and stuff in there. The front end's based on Angular, so it's from Google. There's quite a big community as well. It's good. Like you can't really not do this stuff without being based in open source. You get, puts you so far ahead. Like you couldn't build everything from first principles. There's just, you would never get anywhere. I suppose the key bit about it is just be careful about what projects you depend on. Like really bleeding edge stuff will be dangerous sometimes. Not even dangerous from a security perspective, just dangerous because you don't know what they'll change it. They'll hack about. There's sometimes some projects are just the things need to settle a bit, and you need a bit of a community behind them. You want to make sure that probably not going to die in the future. You want to keep that community about them and just be, you just don't have to always pick the latest thing. Just go back a few steps. The thing has been around for 6 months or a year or more, and it's kind of starting to establish itself and starting to settle a wee bit. Especially this is really true around front end development at the minute, because it's a bit crazy the amount of frameworks and stuff that's out there. And React, Angular, like there's so many, there's ones popping up every day and people are kind of doing stuff. It needs to kind of settle a wee bit. So you don't want to get caught up in that, because it could actually it could really wreck your business. Because you can spend a lot of time with a framework and then have to basically it'll get discontinued, and you'll just have to replace it, and it'll be a massive piece of work to replace it.
Great, man. And on a similar sort of note as well, I actually asked Chris this question on one of our talks before. What are your thoughts as a CTO on no code? Like, are you a fan of no code tools? Do you think it's something people should use as a startup, or should people just be focusing on let's let the technical people become software developers and work on software?
Sorry, this for me, this one, the no code?
Yeah.
So the no code thing, I think for some use cases it's okay, but I don't really think it's, maybe I'm skeptical as a software developer, but I don't really think it's a new thing. Like there's been kind of code builders around for a very long time in different forms. Even, WordPress was a very good example of a kind of a first stage of that. Like, and it's been around nearly as long as the internet, but it works well for some use cases, basic use cases. But a lot of times I think it's good for MVPs, prototypes. I'd be reluctant to build a product on it, and release a product under it, because you wouldn't have the flexibility. And also, like if you're building if it was an open source no code solution, which there isn't many out there yet, and it was a big community, it would be okay. But if you're building something on the top of, I don't know, Bubble or something, and you're totally at their mercy. If they go down or they go belly up in a few years, like what do you really have? You have no control over that. So you kind of want, I think, as your startup, once you prove yourself, as an MVP, you want more control over that. Like we build most of our stuff, we run it on AWS. There's no real, we kind of trust that AWS is going to be there for a long time. There's like half the internet runs on it. We kind of cut out any kind of, we used to run on others, solutions like Heroku and things, but even that is kind of like we didn't have the control we needed to. So we kind of kept paring it back to just AWS. And even AWS, we have to be careful. Like there's new features in AWS, new services, and we have had issues with things like we use Lambda, but things about Lambda and AFS and stuff, different things that are new, that don't really work out well together. And again, you're in the bleeding edge and you had problems, and AWS they'll help you, but it's kind of like, well, that's just the way it works. We have to, we'll fix that in a few weeks, but that's not really much good to us. So you have to be very careful about that. Pick the stuff that's kind of rock solid and established and has been around for a long time.
Well, Richard, then a question for JP and Griffin. So sort of off that sort of no code tangent, how important is it to find experts to work within your startup? Or is it more about just having that entrepreneurial energy that you want to have in your team?
You can go Kufa first.
For me, it's all about experts, right? I was just listening to Richard talking about the product stuff and everything else like that, and I'm like, oh, wow, okay, what's that all about? So I think for me, it's about getting experts in, and really kind of you get experts in because they're good at what they do, they know what they're doing, and you give them the platform to basically go out there and do what they need to do. And that's always been my strategy. When I sat down with Naily, I said, look, this is what we want to build. This is how it's going to look in my head. This is, you should tell the story, because I literally gave a slide deck of like 20 or 30 something slides with all my kind of thoughts around how this platform could look, where it needs to go, the kind of customers, how the journey is going to work, and all that type of stuff. And she kind of took it away and brought it alive. So to me, I think, yeah, it's all about bring your experts in, allow them to basically get on with what they do best. Your job as a leader in that team is just to kind of create the environment for them, and just making sure that, look, I'm there to help you in whatever you need. So when Naily said, look, we need someone to help us put a 3-year development plan. I haven't really done that at that level, especially if you want to take something to market and get investing in large investment. So I brought Dion in, who, he just completed a £2.5 million seed round. So he knows what it's like, presenting that from a product plan perspective, etc. So yeah, experts all the way, give them the kind of the right environment and just let them fly. That's my simple strategy.
Yeah, just the 100% right. I think that initially you're going to need those experts because you want to hit the ground running, don't you? Yeah, you want to be able to speak to somebody who either they know what their role is, like I've said before. I think though, whenever you start building the team, it is also important to start creating pipelines in terms of the product development or just the business development. As the team grows, sometimes we've worked with organizations who have had to sort of do an apprenticeship type role. Somebody has a specific they meet the requirements of one part of the job, but I would dare say you have to start with the actual, because skills, depending on what you're doing, sometimes there can be skills shortages, and then depending on the industry you're looking at, sometimes especially trades, for instance, at the moment there's a big cry out for trade, right? So completely unrelated to the techie side of things, but what their model works really well in that, especially up in mid-Ulster, that they'll be bringing kids in, or even older people in that can teach things, so they know a little bit, and then they're working with them. But that's as you scale the team up, so it's definitely important to be considering initially. Yes, you need to know, everyone needs to know what their kind of discipline is. When you start to scale that team up, you need to identify, you might not get the people in who, maybe you can't even afford it. Maybe you can't afford to pay them the full skilled wage, and therefore longevity wise from a buy-in perspective, and just to build that pipeline of leaders within the organization as well as skilled people. Maybe you could bring them in, they know a little bit, and you're going to take the time to I suppose go through an apprenticeship style kind of incremental growth in terms of skills and within the team.
Sorry, what about culture fit, AP? How does culture fit affect teams building?
Yeah, so whenever you're looking at the culture, for me, culture is completely central to building your team. We used to say recruit for culture, and what we meant by that was, bring people in who you think will fit in. That doesn't really work in practice. What you need is you actually need well-rounded, from a diversity perspective. You want people, not only just people hear diversity, they think of just the usual sort of religion and different backgrounds and different cultural settings. You want to bring people in with different skills, and it's nice for people for you to have a diverse team in that perspective. When we're looking at culture, we're talking about 5 key areas. The strategy, where's the vision, where are you going, what are the key objectives and goals in that, and as well as that, what are the behaviors you want from your team. Then you're looking at leadership. You're looking at are you bringing somebody on that's going to be an influencer, whether that's from an informal or a formal perspective. Then communication, which is the biggest problem in every organization, whether you're good at it or not. You can improve in communication, and that can look like systems and processes, or it can be right down to your emotional intelligence as a leader. And then lastly, you're looking at motivation, and you're looking at mindset. And mindset's a big one now. Obviously, in the last year, everyone's trying to figure out ways to improve self-care. And whenever you're bringing people on, you want to identify at what point, do you have a handle on your culture? Do you understand what your culture is and what the subcultures are in that? And what do you need to balance that out? So the idea of everybody being the same, you don't want that. You don't want everyone sort of being yes men or women. You want people to have different insights, especially in the startup phase. You want people to be able to add something to it.
Oh, that's great advice, JP. Similarly, Griffin, do you have any thoughts around that? Just when you mentioned diversity.
Well, in terms of culture fit, I think what JB said is absolutely right. And when you're recruiting your team to start off with, you as a leader can have a big influence around how do I bring that diversity of mind and thinking and kind of contribution into play. And it's looking at that. So I know already, the type of product leader that Nelly is, and what our product owner needs to look like potentially, and also where we're going as a team. So hopefully, the culture fit part is really, really important. It's core, because if you don't get that right, then you're paying the price for a very, very long time.
And Scarlett, what are your thoughts around diversity, and particularly even from a customer experience type of thing? Does having a diverse team affect the actual product?